My most recent book is one on legal systems very different from ours. It came out of a seminar that I taught for many years at Santa Clara University, in which I was trying to make sense of different legal systems. That the underlying theory was that all human societies face about the same problems. They solve them in an interesting variety of different ways, and they're all grown-ups and should all be taken seriously. And one part of it involved my subject of my talk tonight, which is a particular kind of legal system that I think of as feud law. And it's a system which has existed in a variety of times and places, and which I am willing to argue is probably the system on top of which most surviving legal systems were built. There is a standard model of law that all of us take for granted, and that is that law is made by legislature or by judges. What I'm trying to do is to make what's on my laptop follow what's on the screen so that I know what's coming next. And for some reason, my laptop, now it's behaving itself. All right. Law is made by the legislature or the judges. The detection and prosecution of offenses is done publicly for criminal law by the police and the prosecutor, but privately for tort law. If somebody dents your car, you don't call the cops, you call a lawyer. On the other hand, once you've figured out who did it, the dispute is resolved in a government court, and the verdict is enforced by the government, of course. Right, that's what we're used to. And it's interesting, one of the puzzles of that is why we have both criminal law and tort law. That if you think about it for a while, it looks like two different mechanisms for doing roughly the same work. I want to discuss a different model. In feud law, law enforcement is private and decentralized. It's historically common. Arguably, most legal systems started that way. In some forms, it still exists, both de facto as private enforcement below the radar of the regular law, and also as part of the logic of some things that are happening in modern conflicts. And I should warn you that the word feud has no connection at all to the word feudal. People always confuse them, but they mean different things, and if you trace the etymology, they come out of different words in the original Indo-European language that all of our languages are descended from. Basic logic of feud law is very simple. If you wrong me, I threaten to harm you unless you compensate me. In order for it to work, it needs to solve a set of different problems. The first problem is that you need some mechanism so that right makes might. Some mechanism so you can't use it as an excuse for extortion. Second problem is the commitment mechanism. You've got to have some way so that people will believe my threat, and I won't just back down when you say, well, if you try to harm me, I'll harm you. You need some mechanism. Furthermore, you need a commitment mechanism that survives death. You want some way such that when you tell someone you've harmed me, you've wronged me, and I'm going to harm you if you don't compensate me, he doesn't respond by killing you, thus eliminating your threat. So you need your commitment mechanism, which will continue to function after you are dead. You need some way of protecting the weak. Since this involves the private threats of force, you need some mechanism so that people who don't have access to much force can still get their rights protected. And you need some way of ending feuds, that when you talk about feuds, people tend to imagine a back and forth in which people keep killing each other. That doesn't seem to be the typical pattern in real feud systems, but you do need some way of preventing it. So let me start with the issue of right makes might. And I will start with the feud law system that I first encountered, and that was Saga period Iceland. Iceland about 1,000 years ago. And that was a society where if you killed somebody, his relatives sued you. And if you didn't settle, there was a court. I usually refer to Iceland as a semi-stateless society because there was a court system, a legislature, a body of law, but no executive arm of government, no government enforcement of court verdicts. So if you sue somebody and you win the case and he doesn't pay, he now gets outlawed. If he is outlawed, it is legal to kill him, and it is tortious to defend him. So if people defend him and anybody gets hurt, then the people defending him get sued and end up owing damages. So in that system, the reason right made might was that there was a legal system with courts. So if I claim you wronged me and you go to court and I lose, now you don't get outlawed and I can't attack you without getting in trouble myself. But if I go to court and I win, and the court says you did wrong me, then I, in effect, have a license to use force against you and can do so in order to make you pay. The Roman Chal gypsies, that's one of the surviving ones. The Roman Chal are the main Romany group in modern England. And in their system, the basic logic of that, which I like to refer to as a primitive version of the Icelandic system of 1,000 years earlier, is that if you cheat somebody, a fellow member of that society, he threatens to beat you up if you don't compensate him. And the society is small enough so that the other people around know whether he cheated you. So if he did cheat you, his friends won't back him and your friends will back you. That's sort of the simplest version of the feud system working. If it's the other way around, it goes the other way around. So the result is that if he cheated you, he either compensates you or leaves town. So in that system, it's the fact that there's a set of informal norms people know, and who supports whom is what prevents you from using it in order to extort people instead of in order to enforce the law. The next system is the Somali system. In northern Somalia, Somaliland, there is a traditional stateless system, to some extent broken down now, but one which certainly existed within my lifetime at least. And in that system, there were traditional legal rules, partly Islamic law, partly not. And there were mechanisms by which, when you had a dispute, you set up a court to determine who was in the right. All of these solve two problems. One of them is to prevent the use of threats for extortion, and the other is to take advantage of the problem pointed out long ago that every man is a biased judge in his own case. So you need some way in which I get to use force against you if you really have wronged me, but not just if I think you have. That's the basic problem. Commitment mechanisms. Commitment mechanisms, I claim, pre-exist our species. People will sometimes tell you that property is an invention of governments. Property not only is an invention of governments, it is not an invention of humans. That there are a variety of kinds of animals, mostly birds and fishes, which exhibit what's called territorial behavior. That means that one individual of this species marks the territory he's claiming, and he somehow turns a switch in his brain so that he will fight any trespasser more and more desperately the farther the trespasser comes into the territory. And the critical fact is that under most circumstances, a fight to the death is a loss to both sides, that the winner is likely to be injured. So unless the trespasser is much bigger and stronger, once he realizes that the defender is really willing to defend, he backs off. So that's a hardwired commitment strategy inside the heads of animals. And it, in fact, exists for humans as well. It's called vengefulness. When somebody wrongs you, you want to get them, even if it's expensive. It's so much hardwired that when I stand up and bump my head, my first reaction is anger. All right? It's quite irrational anger in that case. But nonetheless, it is the way we react. But in addition, human societies have a variety of external commitment mechanisms to make sure that I actually carry out my threat, and therefore it's in your interest to back down and compensate me. Think of the feud law situation as really a magnified version of the territorial animal situation, because that's what it really is. One reason is that I want to maintain the reputation that I defend my rights. If you cut wood in my forest, and I say, compensate me or I'll beat you up or I'll attack you, and you say, ha ha, you try to attack me, I'll attack you, and I back down, other people now know that I'm a safe target, that stealing from me won't get you into trouble. I don't want that. I want to maintain the reputation. Furthermore, human beings care about status. Being a wimp is shameful. You lose status. The girls won't go out with you. So, at the same time, success in this game gains status. So that in a number of societies I've looked at, including both the Icelandic and the Comanche Indians, you sometimes have a case where someone doesn't have enough force to enforce their rights, so you get a volunteer enforcer, somebody who wants to prove that he can defeat whoever the bad guy is, and therefore offers to do so. How do we enforce our rights after we're dead? And the answer in something like the Icelandic system is that your kin inherit your rights. They inherit your claim and enforce it for the obvious reason that they don't want their relatives. Let me go back one. The kin inherit your claim and they enforce it because they want to establish the fact that killing one of their families gets you into trouble. And besides, the claim is worth money. So they, having gotten the claim for killing you, in Iceland that's 200 ounces of silver, they would like to collect that, so they have an incentive to enforce the claim even after you've been killed. In the Somali system, can you read the bottom of that screen? Those chairs are in the way, I'm afraid. All right, the Somali system is an interesting system where people are organized into a set of nested coalitions based partly on contract and partly on kinship. And the coalition you're in has the right to share in the damage payments you receive and the obligation to help you enforce them. If you want details, you'll have to find my book. That's true in general. This is a very brief summary of a much longer story. All right? Next question is, how do we protect the weak? My favorite answer on that is the Icelandic solution. In Saga period Iceland, claims were marketable. So we imagine that I'm an elderly man with one son, somebody kills the son, I'm entitled to sue him and collect 200 ounces of silver, but I know that if I try, I'll never make it to the courthouse. Someone will beat me up. However, my neighbor is a wealthy farmer with 4 big sons who went a Viking in their youth and lots of friends and allies, so I transfer my claim to him. He collects the claim, maybe he splits the money with me, maybe he doesn't, depending on how hard it is to collect it, but in any case, the person who wronged me has paid a penalty, which is the objective that I want. So that's the Icelandic solution. I like to say that in that respect, modern American law is a mere 1,000 years behind the cutting edge of legal technology, because if you think about it, transferable tort claims make quite a lot of sense. The Somali solution I just described, which is that you have a group formed by a mix of kinship and contract. Their members share the right to collect damages and the obligation to enforce claims. Termination of feud. That's generally the last of my 4 categories. What happens if I think you wronged me, but you disagree? You therefore refuse to pay damages, so I harm you. You view that as my wronging you, so you threaten to retaliate if I don't compensate you. I disagree and refuse, and you can imagine an endless feud. And there are different solutions in both the Icelandic and the Somali system, and in other societies I'm not going to go into. The Icelandic and Somali, there we are. The Icelandic solution, if I retaliate to somebody who hasn't been outlawed, if I don't go through normally we never get to court because most cases settle out of court. But If you refuse to pay when I demand payment, I don't go to the court and attack you. Now I have violated the rules, and I owe damage to him, or if I killed him, to his heirs. So if I ignore the court verdict, it rapidly gets very expensive. Second Icelandic solution is arbitration. We find somebody who is powerful and respected. Both sides promise to accept his ruling. If he rules against me and I accept, I don't look like a wimp. All right, it's what I agreed to. Sorry, made a mistake. And if I don't accept, he joins the coalition against me, and I now have another powerful enemy. And if you actually look at the Icelandic history, it looks as though most feuds terminated fairly quickly, either by court verdict or by arbitration. The Somali case, they had, as I was mentioning, a system of ad hoc courts. But also one bit that I thought was interesting when I was reading the anthropological literature on that was there was a case where two groups were in conflict, and the elders of the groups decided too many people were being killed. So being good economists, they raised the price. That is to say, there was a traditional rule on how much damages you owed if you killed somebody. Both sides agreed to make it more. If you want people to do less of something, you make it more expensive. I want to claim that this system underlies many surviving legal systems. That if you look at Anglo-American common law, it grew out of Anglo-Saxon law, which was basically the Icelandic system plus a king. The king took the position that certain offenses were offenses against him as well as the victim. Therefore, he had a claim to some of the money. And eventually, you have a gradual revenue grab, by which eventually, by the time of the Norman conquest, the kings are claiming all of the damage payment that should have gone to the victim. Rabbinic law, I think Jewish law may be the best documented legal system in the history of the world. There's an enormous literature going through back for a very long time, literally hundreds of thousands of the equivalent of court cases. And if you look at it, it looks an awful lot as though you've got the remnants of a feud system. For example, if somebody commits murder, he's supposed to be tried in the city where it occurred. If the verdict is that he is to be executed, he is executed by the avenger of blood. Who is the avenger of blood? The kinsman who in a feud system would have taken over responsibility for the claim. If it is concluded that it was a roughly second-degree murder, they don't use the same categories, but not something that he gets executed for, he is supposed to go to one of the cities of refuge, which existed in ancient Israel, remain in exile there until the high priest dies. It's a sentence of indefinite length, and then he's free. If the avenger of blood catches him on his way to the city of refuge, he can kill him. Furthermore, it is illegal for the avenger of blood to accept a money payment in order not to kill him. Well, that strongly suggests that it's built on top of an old system where what normally had happened was that the kin had the option of either avenging or accepting money payment. And if you look at Islamic law, fiqh, the part of Islamic law that deals with killing or injuring people treats it as a tort, not a crime. That if you injure somebody, you owe a certain amount of damages according to the law. It's up to him to take legal action to make you pay. It's true he has a court and a legal system to enforce it. Islamic law isn't feud law. It's probably Bedouin law was. But you've got the remnant in the form that is treated privately. And if you kill somebody, again, if it's something like first-degree murder, his kin have the option of either retaliating, killing you, or accepting diya, which is the Arabic wehrgeld, that is to say the payment for killing somebody. And if what you do is to kill him under circumstances with some justification, then they can't retaliate, but you owe a smaller amount of diya. So Roman law, which is, oops, something just went wrong. Let me go back. Roman law We don't know very much about the origins of it. The original form of Roman law is something called the 12 Tables, which has not survived. We've got quotes of bits of it, and people have tried to reconstruct it. But if you look at the 12 Tables, they refer to self-help remedies. It is up to the plaintiff to drag the defendant to court, and under some circumstances, the verdict gives the plaintiff the right to seize, sell, or execute the defendant. So it looks, although I'm much less certain about that one, as though Roman law also was built on top of feudal law. Feudal law still exists. Some of the ways that it exists are informally under the shadow of state law. So the Romanichal I already mentioned, where in general the Romani tactic for a very long time has been to stay below the radar screen, to conduct their own affairs, enforce their own rules, and do their best not to let the official authorities keep track of them. There are advantages and disadvantages to this strategy. The Nazis attempted to eliminate both the Jews and the Romani. They got very nearly all of the Jews in the territories they controlled. We don't have accurate figures, but it looks as though they got about a quarter of the Romani. So that's an advantage of that strategy. There are disadvantages as well. If you're curious, I've got a chapter on the Romani, who are a very interesting group of people, as it happens. Sicilian Mafia would be a famous example, but there are other examples where you have unofficial, as it were. In fact, the Romani in America engage in their own version of feud law, and one of their main weapons is us. That I've got an interesting account from a woman who interacted with a bunch of American Romani back at about 1980s of a case where they have marriage by purchase. A man buys a wife for his son. The son reports, "She won't sleep with me except as a sister." The father concludes this is fraud, that the father of the woman wants to get the money and then get his daughter back, ends up taking actions against him. What's the action? Go to the city where they are and accuse him of a crime. That gets him into trouble. Well, after we settle this dispute, and a good deal more happens, it's a long story, then I will withdraw the charges or won't show up for the trial. So they do a certain amount of direct violence too, but a good deal of it is essentially manipulating our legal system for their purposes. But also within our state legal system, there are circumstances in which you might want to sue somebody who is innocent. One of the things that limits your ability to do so is the threat that he can retaliate by suing you. And the version that I found interesting, because I'm in Silicon Valley, is how this plays out in patent infringement litigation. Let us suppose that Apple wants to sue Samsung. And suppose that Apple's lawyers say we're probably going to lose. We don't have a very good claim that Samsung is infringing our patents or our trade secrets. However, the head of Apple says, look, even if we're wrong, the court might rule in our favor. Courts make mistakes. And even if we lose the case, people will buy fewer Samsung phones because they'll be afraid that if we win the case, Samsung will have to remove features from their phones. So it looks as though suing Samsung is a sensible strategy even if we're going to lose. But there's a problem. Samsung can sue us too. And that's a reason why Apple will not find it in their interest to sue unless they have a strong case. And that's a case where the reason why right makes might in that particular feud system is the court system. That is to say, if Samsung has really violated Apple's patents, you're much more likely to win the case than they haven't. And if Apple has really violated Samsung's patents, Samsung's more likely to. So that's an interesting case where what you're having is essentially feud law as the logical structure of conflicts within modern law. There's a problem, however. The problem is what are referred to by people who don't like them as patent trolls. That is, firms, the technical term is non-practicing entity. You have a firm that owns a lot of patents, never uses any of them, but sues other people on the claim they're infringing. If they try that on Apple, it won't work, because Apple is a repeat player, and therefore Apple won't agree to pay them damages. On the other hand, suppose you're a startup, you've got limited resources, You know that if they manage to persuade the court that you're infringing their patent, even though you think you aren't, you're going to go bankrupt, so you settle instead. So it looks as though that's a successful form of extortion. And it's one that works because since the non-practicing entity doesn't practice any patents, we can't retaliate. We can't sue them for infringing our patents when they don't do anything. It's like an Icelandic system where somebody has perfect armor, where someone has impenetrable armor and so can't be attacked. Well, this is getting beyond feud law, but since my book is about a lot of legal systems, I have a solution for this, which I borrowed from Periclean Athens. In the Athenian legal system of 2,500 years ago, for at least some tort cases, the losing plaintiff owed damages to the prevailing defendant. So you sued somebody and claimed he owed you $24,000, only it would be Greek money. If he wins, you owe him $4,000 for the offense of suing him when he was innocent. And you can think of that as the damage payment for suing an innocent party, thus imposing a risk on him of losing due to court error. All right? So I want to claim that if we imported an idea from Athens from 2,500 years ago into our legal system, that would help control people who themselves use the legal system in order to misuse a feud law approach, if that makes any sense, if it isn't too complicated. So if you want more on this stuff, my webpage is daviddfriedman.com. It has got full text of a fair number of my books and most of my articles, as well as most of the talks I've given. So if you want to hear more of my talks, you can do it for free online. My latest nonfiction book is Legal Systems Very Different from Ours, and that's what I've just been describing. And I think I am just about within my time limit, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you. And it occurs to me, if I have one more minute, that I might mention, for those of you who have read my first book, The Machinery of Freedom, that my conclusion in that book, I was trying to sketch what a society might look like in which it was entirely privatized, in which all government functions were taken over by private institutions. And I worked out a conjectural system. And now, after this research, I have concluded that I was reinventing the wheel. That what I was doing was imagining a modern, high division of labor, large population version of what existed in primitive form in many societies in the past. Thank you.